for today, you are going to be either reading or listening to the story My Delicate Heart Condition by Tony Cade Bambara. So, this story is told in first person point of view. And so, today we're going to be really looking at how we learn about the different characters. So, think about how you learn about different people when you first meet them. What is it that enables you to get to know a person? It's the way they talk, the way they look, the way they're dressed, the people that they hang out with, where they live, or their physical surroundings. So there are a lot of different things. So that's what we're going to be looking at with this particular story. Harriet Watkins loves excitement as much as she loves scarring other kids with her spooky stories. She also loves watching the Fly family perform death defying feats on the high wire at the circus. Nothing scares Harriet, or does it? The title of this story, My Delicate Heart Condition, gives you a clue that the tale is told by a first person narrator. The I in the story is Harriet Watkins, and she's telling us about herself. Harriet speaks in a distinct or special voice. The words and sentences she uses are lively and friendly, as if she were talking to her classmates rather than writing a story. As you read, listen to the voice of Harriet, the storyteller. Part of your job as a reader is to decide how credible or believable the narrator is. So here are questions that you can ask yourself to decide whether the narrator is believable. Does the narrator exaggerate or say that something is bigger or more exciting than it probably is? Think about the people who come back from fishing and say, I caught a fish this big, when they really caught a tiny little bluegill, right? Are they trustworthy? Are they credible? The second thing you need to consider when thinking about the credibility of the narrator is, does she misunderstand what adults are saying? Finally, does the narrator not know things that other characters and the reader may know? Other reading skills that you're going to be considering here as you go through this story is the fact of whether or not you can draw conclusions based on evidence or important details. You probably draw conclusions about the world around you every day. For example, one rainy morning, your friend arrives at your house, dripping wet and out of breath. You might conclude that he forgot his umbrella and that he's run to your house in an attempt to stay dry. You also make judgments based on evidence when you read a story. You think about what the narrator tells you and what the characters in the story say and do. Then, using what you've learned from the story and from your own life experiences, you put those details together to form a conclusion. As you read, check to see if your conclusions are correct. Then there are some vocabulary words that may be new to you: withstand, vacant, suspended, and proportions. You can read the definitions there. Then we also have to think about literal versus figurative meanings of words. If you say that your heart is broken, we mean that figuratively, right? Typically, we say that when we're sad, when we're upset about something. But if we think about that from a literal standpoint, it would be like that your heart is literally not doing its job. It's not pumping blood through to the rest of your body. All right, so anytime you're looking at specific vocabulary words or phrases in a story, you need to consider literal and figurative, and figure out which the narrator is meaning. All right, to the story, My Delicate Heart Condition. My cousin Joanne has not been allowed to hang out with me for some time because she went and told Aunt Hazel that I scare her to death whenever she sleeps over at our house or I spend the weekend at hers. So look at those first four lines that I just read. Let's look at the narrator's voice. It says over here in the left-hand column, voice is the narrator's special way of speaking to the reader. Reread lines 1 through 4. Underline the words that sound like a young girl talking. So think about what I just read. My cousin Joanne has not been allowed to hang out with me for some time because she went and told Aunt Hazel that I scare her to death whenever she sleeps over at our house or I spend the weekend at hers. So I would think hang out, maybe do sleepovers, things like that. Those are all maybe younger girls and vocabulary that they would use. The truth is, I sometimes like to tell stories about bloodthirsty vampires or ugly monsters that lurk in clothes closets or giant beetles that eat their way through the shower curtain, like I used to do at camp to entertain the kids in my bunk. But Joanne always cries, and that makes the stories even weirder, like background music, her crying. And two, I'm not going to lie about it, I get spookier on purpose until all the little crybabies are stuffing themselves under their pillows and throwing their sneakers at me and making such a racket that Mary, the counselor, has to come in and shine her flashlight around the bunkhouse. I play like I'm asleep. The rest of them are too busy blubbering and finding their way out from under the blankets to tell Mary that
Jaden
it's me.
Chase, if you're in the building, please come to the front lobby. Jaden Chase, if you're in the building, please come to the front lobby.
Sorry for their interruption there. Besides, once they get a load of her standing against the moonlight in that long white robe of hers, looking like a ghost, they just start up again, and pretty soon the whole camp is awake. Anyway, that's what I do for fun. So, Joanne hasn't been around, and this year I'll have to go to the circus by myself and to camp without her. My mother said on the phone to Aunt Hazel, "Good, keep Joe over there, and maybe Harriet will behave herself if she's got no one to show off to." So what does that tell us? How does her mom feel about her if she's telling that to Aunt Hazel? For all the years my mother's known me, she still doesn't understand that my behaving has got nothing to do with who I hang out with. A private thing between me, or maybe between me and the Fly family, since they were the ones that first got me to sit through monster movies and withstand all the terror I could take. For 4 summers now, me and the Fly family have had this thing going. A battle of nerves, you might say. Each year, they raise the rope closer and closer to the very top of the tent. I hear they're going to perform outdoors this year and be even higher. And they stretch the rope further across the rings where the clowns and the pony riders perform. Each year they get bolder and more daring with their rope dancing and the swinging by the legs and flinging themselves into empty space, making everyone throw up their hands and gasp for air until Mr. Fly, at the very last possible second, swings out on his bar to catch them by the tips of their heels. Everyone just dies and clutches at their hearts. Everybody but me. I sit there calmly. I've trained myself. Joanne used to die and duck her head under the benches and stay there till it was all over. Last summer, they got really bold. On the final performance, just before the fair closed and some revival type tent show comes in and all the kids go off to camp, the Fly family performed without a net. I figured they'd be up to something, so I made sure my stomach was like steel. I did 10 push ups before breakfast, 20 sit ups before lunch, skipped dinner altogether. My brother Teddy kidded me all day. Harriet's trying out for the Olympics. I passed up the ice cream man on the corner and the pizza and sausage stand by the schoolyard and the cotton candy and jelly apple lady and the pickle and penny candy boy. In fact, I passed up all the stands that lead from the street down the little roadway to the fairgrounds that used to be a swamp when we first moved from Baltimore to Jamaica, Long Island. It wasn't easy, I'm not going to lie, but I was taking no chances. Between the Balloon Man and the Wheel of Fortune was the usual clump of ladies from church who came night after night to try to win the giant punch bowl set on the top shelf above the wheel, but had to settle night after night for a jar of gumdrops or salt and pepper shakers or some other little thing from the bottom shelf. And from the Wheel of Fortune to the tent was at least a million stands selling BB bats and jawbreakers and gingerbread and sweet potato pie and frozen custard. And like I said, it wasn't easy. A million ways to tempt you, to unsettle your stomach and make you lose the battle to the Fly family. I said, so what? Think about it now. Why is the narrator avoiding all of this extra food? And why did she say she has to, she's doing push ups and sit ups or trying to tighten up her stomach? Why does that matter? She's going to the circus to watch the Fly family do the acrobats or do the swinging on the ropes and stuff. Think about why she would do
10th
that.
period teachers, please be sure and bring Chromebooks to the Locker Street now. 10th period teachers, please bring their Chromebooks to Locker Street now.
I sat there almost enjoying the silly clowns who came tumbling out of a steamer trunk no bigger than the one we have in the basement where my mother keeps my old report cards and photographs and letters and things. And I almost enjoyed the fire eater and the knife thrower, but I was so close up I could see how there wasn't any real thrill. I almost enjoyed the fat leg girls who rode the ponies two at a time and standing up, but their costumes weren't very pretty. Just an ordinary polo shirt like you get if you run in the PAL meets, and short skirts you can wear on either side like the big girls wear at the roller rink. And I almost enjoyed the jugglers, except that my Uncle Bubba can juggle the dinner plates better any day of the week so long as Aunt Hazel isn't there to stop him. I was impatient and started yawning. Finally, all the clowns hitched up their baggy pants and tumbled over each other out of the ring and into the dark. The jugglers caught all the things that were up in the air and, yawning, just like me, went off to the side. The pony girls brought their horses to a sudden stop that raised a lot of dust, then jumped down into the dirt and bowed. Then the ringmaster stepped into the circle of light and tipped his hat, which was a little raggedy from where I was sitting, and said, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, what you've all been waiting for, the main attraction, the Fly family!" And everyone jumped to shout like crazy as they came running out on their toes to stand in the light and then climb the ropes. I took a deep breath and folded my arms over my chest, and a kid next to me went into hiding, acting like she was going to tie her shoelaces. There used to be four of them. The father, a big guy with a bald head and bushy mustache and shoulders and arms like King Kong. A tall, lanky mother whom you'd never guess could even climb into a high chair or catch anything heavier than a ping pong ball to look at her. The oldest son, who looked like his father, except he had hair on his head but none on his face, and a big face it was, so that no matter how high up he got, you could always tell whether he was smiling or frowning or counting. The younger boy, was about 13, maybe, had a vacant stare like he was a million miles away feeding his turtles or something, anything but walking along a tightrope or flying through the air with his family. I'd always liked to watch him because he was as cool as I was. But last summer, the little girl got into the act. My grandmother says she's probably, I don't know what they mean by that word. It's really small and I'm not going to say it because I think it's derogatory, because no self-respecting mother would allow her child to be up there acting like a bird. Just a baby, she'd say. Can't be more than 6 years old. She should be home in bed. My grandfather would give me a look when she started in, and we'd smile at her together. They almost got to me that last performance, dodging around with new routines and two at a time so that you didn't know which one Mr. Fly was going to save at the last minute. But he'd fly out and catch the little boy and swing over to the opposite stand where the big boy was flying out to catch them both by the wrists. And the poor woman would be left kind of dangling there, suspended. Then she'd do this double flip, which would kill off everyone in the tent, except me, of course, and swing out on the very bar she was on in the first place. And then they'd mess around two or three flying at once just to confuse you until the big drum roll started and out steps the little girl in a party dress and a huge blindfold wrapped around her little head and a pink umbrella like they sell down in Chinatown. And I won't lie about it, I almost let my heart thump me off the bench. I almost thought I too had to tie my shoelaces. But I sat there, stubborn, and the kid starts bouncing up and down on the rope like she was about to take off and tear through the canvas roof. Then out swings her little brother, and before you know it, Fly Jr., like a great eagle with his arms flapping, grabs up the kid, her eye band in his teeth, and swoops her off to the bar that's already got Mrs., Mr., and Big Bro on it, and surely there's no room for him, and everyone's standing on their feet, clutching at their faces. Everyone but me, because I know from the get-go that Mr. and Mrs. are going to leave the bar to give Junior room and fly over to the other side, which is exactly what they do. The lady in front of me, Mrs. Perez, who does all the sewing in our neighborhood, gets up and starts shaking her hands like ladies do to get the fingernail polish to dry. And she says to me with her eyes jammed shut, "I must go finish the wedding gowns. Tell me who died. And she scoots through the aisle, falling all over everybody with her eyes still shut and never looks up. And Mrs. Kane, she taps me on the back and leans over and says, "Some people just can't take it." And I smile at her and at her twins who are sitting there with their mouths open. I fold my arms over my chest and just dare the Fly family to do their very worst. The minute I got to camp, I ran up to the main house where all the counselors gather to say hello to the parents and talk with the directors. I had to tell Mary the latest doings with the Fly family, but she put a finger to her mouth like she sometimes does to shush me. "Let's not have any scary stuff this summer, Harriet," she said, looking over my shoulder at a new kid. This new kid, Willie, was from my old neighborhood in Baltimore, so we got friendly right off. Then he told me that he had a romantic heart, so I quite naturally took him under my wing and decided not to give him a heart attack with any ghost tales. Mary said he meant rheumatic heart, but I don't see any difference. So I told Mary to move him out of George's tent and give him a nicer counselor who'd respect his romantic heart. George used to be my play boyfriend when I first came to camp as a little kid and didn't know any better. But he is not a nice person. He makes up funny nicknames for people which aren't funny at all, like calling Eddie Michaels the Watermelon Kid or David Farmer Charcoal Plenty, which I really do not appreciate, and especially from a counselor. And once he asked Joanne, who was the table monitor, to go and fetch a pail of milk from the kitchen. And the minute she got up, he started hatching a plot trying to get the kids to hide her peanut butter sandwich and put spiders in her soup. I had to remind everyone at the table that Joanne was my first cousin by blood and that I would be forced to waste the first bum that laid a hand on her plate. And old George says, "Oh, don't be a dumbhead, Harriet. Jo's so stupid she won't even notice." And I told him right then and there that I was not his play girlfriend anymore and would rather marry the wolf man than grow up and be his wife. And just in case he didn't get the message, that night around the campfire when we were all playing Little Sally Walker sitting in a saucer, and it was my turn to shake it to the east and shake it to the west, shake it to the very one that I love best, I shook straight for Mr. Nelson, the lifeguard, who was not only the ugliest person in camp, but the arch enemy of old George. And that very first day of camp last summer, when Willie came running up to me to get in line for lunch, here comes George talking some simple stuff about what a beautiful head you have, Willie. A long, smooth, streamlined head, a sure sign of superior gifts, definitely genius proportions. And poor Willie went for it, grinning and carrying on and touching his head, which, if you want to know the truth, is a bullet head, and that's all there is to it. And he's turning to me every which way like he's modeling his head in a fashion show. And the minute his back is turned, old George makes a face about Willie's head, and all the kids in the line bust out laughing. So I had to beat up a few right then and there and finish off the rest later in the shower for being so stupid, laughing at a kid with a romantic heart. One night in the last week of August, when the campfire party is held, it was very dark and the moon was all smoky, and I just couldn't help myself. And I started in with a story about the great caterpillar who was going to prowl through the tents and nibble off everybody's toes. And Willie started this whimpering in the back of his throat, so I had to switch the story real quick to something cheerful. But before I could do that, old George picked up my story and added a wicked witch who put spells on city kids who came to camp, and a hunchback dwarf that chopped up tents and bunk beds, and a one-eyed phantom giant who gobbled up the hearts of underprivileged kids. And every time he got to the part where the phantom ripped out a heart, poor Willie would get louder and louder until finally he started rolling around in the grass and screaming, and all the other kids went crazy and scattered behind the rocks, almost kicking the fire completely out as they dashed off into the darkness yelling bloody murder. And the counselors could hardly round us all up. Me too, I'm not going to lie about it. Their little circles of flashlight bobbing in and out of the bushes along the patches of pine, bumping into each other as they scrambled for us kids. And poor Willie rolling around something awful, so they took him to the infirmary. I was sneaking some ginger snaps into him later that night when I heard Mary and another senior counselor fussing at old George in the hallway. "You've been picking on that kid ever since he got here, George, but tonight was the limit." "I wasn't picking on him. I was just trying to tell a story." All that talk about hearts, gobbling up hearts, and underpriv. Yeah, You were directing it all at that little kid. You should be. I wasn't even talking about him. They're all underprivileged kids after all. I mean, all the kids are underprivileged. I huddled back into the shadows and almost banged into Willie's iron bed. I was hoping he'd open his eyes and wink at me and tell me he was just fooling, that it wasn't so bad to have an underprivileged heart. But he just slept. I'm an underprivileged kid too, I thought to myself. I knew it was a special camp, but I'd never realized. No wonder Aunt Hazel screamed so about my scary stories, and my mother flicked off the TV when the monsters came on, and Mary was always shushing me. We all had bad hearts. I crawled into the supply cabinet to wait for Willie to wake up so I could ask him about it all. I ate all the ginger snaps, but I didn't feel any better. You have a romantic heart, I whispered to myself, settling down among the bandages. You will have to be careful. It didn't make any difference to Aunt Hazel that I had changed, that I no longer told scary stories or dragged my schoolmates to the latest creature movie or raced my friends to the edge of the roof or held my breath or ran under the train rail when the train was already in sight. As far as she was concerned, I was still the same old spooky kid I'd always been. So Joanne was kept at home. My mother noticed the difference, but she said over the phone to my grandmother, "She's acting very ladylike these days, growing up." I didn't tell her about my secret, that I knew about my heart. And I was glad if Joanne wasn't around, because I would have blabbed it all to her and scared her to death. When school starts again, I decided I'll ask my teacher how to outgrow my underprivileged heart. I'll train myself, just like I did with the Fly family. Well, I guess you'll want some change to go to the fair again, huh? My mother said, coming into my room, dumping things in her pocketbook. No, I said, I'm too grown up for circuses. She put the money on the dresser anyway. I was lying, of course. I was thinking what a terrible strain it would be for Mrs. Perez and everybody else if, while sitting there with the Fly family zooming around in the open air a million miles above the ground, little Harriet Watkins should drop dead with a fatal heart attack behind them. I lost, I said out loud. Lost what? The battle with the Fly family. She just stood there a long time looking at me, trying to figure me out, the way mothers are always doing, but should know better. Then she kissed me goodbye and left for work. Okay, so that's the end of the story. So I want you to kind of think about the title of this story, My Delicate Heart Condition. What two kinds of delicate heart condition are in this story? So what do you think? Some of these kids at the camp, what kind of heart condition do they have versus the other heart condition that Harriet is making reference to here? Okay, so you're going to want to think about that. And then I want you to go to the assignment on Schoology. It's posted there. It's called My Delicate Heart Condition Character Chart. And there you're going to find 3 different phrases or lines that Harriet says. And then you're going to write in the box that has the text box there for you to type in. You're going to say what that line specifically reveals about her. So if you just happened to walk up and heard her saying that line, what could we deduce about her? What conclusion can we come to based on the fact that she said whatever's in that box? Okay, so that is where you're headed next.